This week inside the Juno Reactor, it's a pleasure to welcome Jason Bentley, a music supervisor of Total Recall, Beetlejuice, Gladiator, Tron, The Matrix. When he was 18 on holiday in the UK, acid house changed his life. His pioneering DJ evangelism across America paved the way for a whole new generation to absorb his love of electronic music through his KRCW shows. I first met Jason on The Matrix, and I hope you enjoy this conversation inside the Juno Reactor. Hi Jason, lovely to have you here.
Hi Ben. So how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, good. Sort of in that sort of weird transition of not really knowing what sort of music I really, really love these days. And so it's great to have you on.
Yeah, thank you.
And you've been a DJ for like a long time now, huh?
Nowadays I think of myself more as a curator of music and culture. Same
sort of thing, really, isn't it? A DJ. A real DJ. I mean, I DJ as Juno Reactor, but I wouldn't class myself as a DJ. Like I can see that with your records and, you're a real collector, a real observer of cultures and what's been happening around the planet.
That's it. I mean, the background is as a DJ kind of technically, but you're also keying into cultural trends and currents and what's interesting and what's always bubbling up from the underground.
And you've done that since, like I was reading about where you came to Europe in like 88 and the whole sort of acid culture. And I mean, I loved that time anyway, because it was like a whole new thing. It sort of suddenly gave so many people an opportunity to do better things.
Yeah, it was such a fertile time. And that became my movement, my youth culture, my British invasion, really, even though the roots of it are here in the States, much like you can kind of look at blues informing rock and British rock. But that whole scene it changed my life. I mean, it became defining for me, and it's still something I celebrate. I do a radio show that's a specialty program on KRCW for electronic dance music still. And this is 30 years later.
And what were the places you were going in? Where were you going in 88 in London?
Let's see. I mean, I got invited over to a rave in the countryside called Tribal Gathering. That might have been a bit later than 88. That might have been the early 90s. But I first came over, I guess, as early as 88.
I think we played at Tribal Gathering, actually.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Yeah. 88, I think I was making my my European kind of summer trip as a student, which a lot of people do, and is a wonderful rite of passage. I visited tons, like 16 countries in 2 months. But my first stop was England, and I picked up on the acid house sound, which was just this fascinating underground. Actually, I can't say it was underground. In England, it was sort of the pop thing. It was, there are all these records that were kind of coming out of Chicago and Detroit that were
Baby's Got to Ride and
Jamie Principle, Rock to the Beat, which was Kevin Saunderson, who eventually, as Inner City, had huge breakout success with tracks like Good Life, and that really set the template for house music with those big chunky piano chords that define deep house. So I just got swept up in it. It was just it was like discovering something. I had grown up on rock and roll and R&B and disco and sort of mainstream sounds in the States. But when I went overseas, and the English have such a great way of sort of, maybe it's part of their colonial history, but they really collect and kind of celebrate and catalog and train spot. There's sort of that kind of
so
calculation.
Much going on with things like Kiss FM as well, wasn't there, in America from New York? So like we were getting tons of tapes from Kiss FM and
Sure. I mean, I just love that kind of, cross currents and cross pollination. And I just was fascinated with subculture from the jump. I mean, before I even knew how to make sense out of it, or if there was a career in being obsessed with that. But it's just something that I've always been drawn to. And that's probably why I can't get rid of these records in the background. And it's sort of sad, but the records continue on this wall and that wall and over there. So there's about 30,000 records in here.
Wow.
But every piece of vinyl is kind of a postcard from another time and place. And I remember immediately, like sort of where I was and who I was at that time. So it's hard to get rid of them.
It's weird because if you saw my record collection, you'd be disgusted with me. It's sort of, I would get a record and I'd love it. I'd just play it 8 million times and then throw it over to the floor. I never got into that thing about being really precious about them. Now they're up in my attic, and they're more likely sort of.
Yeah.
But how did you go from that type of like being a fan of that type of music and then going, okay, I think I'm going to take this on?
Well, I mean, it was a calling. I couldn't stop the gravitational pull of the music and the culture and the underground. And so becoming a journalist, becoming a DJ, throwing parties, bringing artists over from England and Europe, and just becoming embedded in the music scene and helping to define it, and then to also become an advocate for it at other levels of the industry, at record labels, working on soundtracks, of course, which is where our paths have crossed. Working at the Grammys to try and help define and shape categories accurately, and really looking at the community as something that I really served as a leadership voice. So I don't know, it wasn't sort of an overnight thing. It was just kind of an evolution of following your particular passion.
And you find that like with that now, you're getting more tracks that you're falling in love with than you were back then, or you're sort of harking semi-nostalgically to the past?
It's a mix. I mean, the exciting thing, and the thing that's always been exciting about that movement and that genre, is it's always reinventing itself. It's always about what's next, what kind of new sonic range can be explored. And that was what was exciting about your music and exciting about things like drum and bass. You know, you really felt like there were new worlds of music being navigated in real time, you know, that we hadn't really heard before and we hadn't sort of processed before. And so that still rings true in the things that I'm interested in mixing and featuring on the radio show on KCRW. And, you know, the other thing that's continued to be exciting is that as a DJ, you're really involved in that process. And there's an artistry to the DJs that play a set of songs and kind of take you on a journey through a set of songs. That's certainly an artistry, and I'm not discounting that. But as a DJ, sort of a club DJ, you're much more involved in mixing the layers of sound and, you know, finding the right keys and the right rhythms. And you're very, very involved in that. So it's always been more exciting to play those records and mix those records because they're supposed to be. Is that something
you spend quite a lot of time doing? You still spend time doing that?
I do. I mean, the show I do on KCRW is a mixed show from start to finish. So, you know, I'm not only thinking about the overall trajectory of sort of the energy and emotionally where we're going, but also just kind of record to record. And I'm putting myself on the spot creatively every show. Like, I don't work out the mix beforehand or rehearse the mixes beforehand. I really want to be in that immediate sort of high wire act of getting that mixed right and playing with it and working with it, really playing the record. You know, people say, oh, you only played a record. No, I'm talking about like really performing the records. And I still love to do that. It's still something that gives me a rush.
And with like radio in America, it's sort of it's become less important, hasn't it, than it used to be. But mainly because there's so many different media outlets and things like this. But I still love listening to the radio. And whether it's classical music or it's like late night sort of underground music, or here we've got a great station called Platform B in Brighton, where there's no talking. Thank God there's like no talking, you know? And
radio is still pretty healthy, I'd say. It's, you know, it's in a gradual decline because, as you say, there are other options, but it's still really the biggest way that people discover new music, which is certainly the area for, you know, of emphasis.
Well, I was wondering about that in America, how much that had sort of plays into it. Because there's obviously a lot of musicians who will more likely check it out on this show, and think how can you really break these sort of boundaries that are very financially? And I know it's not with yours. Yours is a public radio, KCRW, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a public funded. It's not a.
It's a bit of an anomaly, and we have certain freedom there. The listeners support that freedom. I'd compare it maybe to BBC Six, perhaps, what I know of BBC Six anyway. But yeah, we enjoy more creative freedom to just play the music that we're inspired by, and that's kind of a rarity. But yeah, I mean, radio is still, it's free. I mean, there's commercials, but it's free, and it's still hardwired to everyone's automobile, and so you don't have to subscribe to anything. You just tune in. And so it has an enduring value.
And with the type of music that you play, which is far more, I suppose, I mean, the things that I've heard you play anyway when I've been in LA, you know, I think I heard you playing Fever Ray and the Knives, or the Knife. Yeah,
I mean, for a long time I did the morning show on KCRW, which is a much bigger audience and a broader palette. The show is called Morning Becomes Eclectic, and it has its own history for years and years before me. And so I was just a steward of that program for about a decade, which is a long time. So my fingerprints are all over it. But that was, you know, the requirement there as a DJ was to really stretch out and include indie folk music and, you know, progressive kind of classical music and rock and roll and jazz and all that stuff. As the name itself suggests, eclectic. The idea is that it's going to be a broad palette of sounds. Nowadays, I stepped down from that role, and also as music director of KCRW at the end of 2019, and just made a conscious decision to move on and try and do something else. I'd kind of been there and done that for a long time, but I held on to the radio show that really spoke to me closest and was most important to me, which is the Dance Electronic Mix show that I retained moving on. So I still do my 2-hour Saturday night slot on KCRW, but that's Metropolis. But I've largely stepped down from my duties at KCRW, and I'm not so involved there. I actually record my show here at home in my studio and just upload it, so I don't even go to the station anymore.
Okay. I mean, I always love those sort of things, like shows like Frasier. And have you ever sort of fancied doing a talk-in show?
I've done a little podcasting, which is, you know,
I've seen you do it for show. You did it for Soho House, yeah?
I did it, yeah. I did a whole season of a show for Soho House, which wasn't renewed. It wasn't picked up. So that's done. But we did a lot of great work. 8 episodes.
I listened to that episode with The Sound of Metal. And also that really amazing film composer, Ludwig
Göransson. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was great.
He's amazing, I think. He can do some really amazing pieces, I think. Yeah. Like in Tenet, there's like one I think called, I think my favorite one is Free Post. Really fantastic work.
That's great to hear from you. From you, I think, you know, He's brilliant. I mean, just because he's got his hands in so many different things. I mean, there's a moment I ran into him on the street here in Santa Monica, actually. And I realized after we chatted for a few minutes on the street, that at that moment in time, he must be one of the most influential people in music in the world, because Black Panther was out. And then there's his project with Donald Glover, which they had put out a single, and it was like the biggest record in the country at the time. Childish Gambino is his project. And I just thought to myself, wow, that person is right now is at the top of, he's just such a modest, understated guy, really genuine and sweet. So it just makes you feel good when people like that are winning,
His chops are really good. And I thought what was really good in that show was when he was talking about, which I think a lot of electronic producers can get on with, you don't get much reaction back from the computer, or keyboards or mixing desks. I mean, you can twiddle a knob and sort of go, woo. But you get far more reaction out of a real instrument. And that interaction between a real instrument's, I think, really quite important these days.
Yeah. Yeah,
in music.
Definitely.
But yeah, I love it. I love his work. And yeah, I thought it was a really good, interesting podcast. And also with the director guy, what was his name? Darius
Martyr, yeah.
I think you asked him at the end something like about what put him in the position that he was now. He was by saying no to everything.
Yeah. Well, that's a luxury, isn't it?
How do you feel about that? Because I think you come over as a person who says yes to everything.
No, I can relate to that. It's a luxury, but it feels good. And it's asserting, yourself and asserting your own kind of vision for something. I think the ultimate goal is to have ownership of the things that you create. And so many times, understandably, feature films are a great example of this. You're serving another vision. Ultimately, you're serving another idea, another story, and that there are so many people involved in the creation process. And so I think, he was just great because he stuck to his guns with this idea. And I think too often people think that just there's overnight success. The great example is when the Grammys come out with their Best New Artist nominees, and you're thinking, well, I've known about several of these for 10 years now. It just takes a lot. You've got to really stand by your idea and protect that flame. And that was a great example of him doing just that. The movie's
for
brilliant
him,
too. You've
obviously,
seen it, right?
I haven't seen the film, but it sounded...
Oh my God, you got to see it. Yeah.
The Sound of Metal.
Yeah.
I saw The Sound of Violence, but I haven't seen The Sound of Metal, but it sounded very interesting, all the thing about being deaf and then creating the sounds of being deaf and the sort of rainbow of colors of what it's like to be deaf and the fear of being deaf as a musician or as a DJ.
The tension there.
It really made me want to see the film.
You would love it.
Yeah. I mean, I've had tinnitus every now and again, so it's sort of, having to listen to water sort of to get rid of it. Or the thing I find gets rid of tinnitus is just listening to music. Like you've worked for like major labels like Maverick, which I think is Madonna's label, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she sold it to Warner Brothers, but yeah.
I mean, how's that? Because when you're working for like a big corporate company like Warner Brothers and now you've gone independent with your own label, how do you feel about that?
It's about resources and expertise in different fields. And, it's interesting because there's so much talk these days about watching platforms like TikTok for emerging artists and emerging hits. And, whether something could go viral is seen as very empowering for independent artists because the idea is that somebody can just put their song up and go direct to fans and blow up. But I think that really overlooks a lot of the expertise in the record label system for developing an artist over time. And I think a lot of this sort of hype around viral success is just flash in the pan. It's really, you need the kinds of resources that you find at record labels, great record labels and visionary label executives to help guide and shape meaningful artists over time. So I'm sort of dismissive of a lot of the talk and the buzz around this idea of TikTok generating meaningful artists. It's just disposable pop. And, there's always an audience for that. And I'm as guilty as anyone. I don't actually look at TikTok, but there's a feature on Instagram that's similar called Reels. And it's just a waste of time, but it's a
great waste of time.
It's a good waste of time. If you just want to look at some girls dancing or some people fighting at a sporting event or something like that, that's all it is. And that's fine. But don't give it more.
I seem to follow too many violin players, because whenever I've got like reels of people playing the violin.
Our algorithms are a little different then.
Because in lockdown I started learning the viola, which is one of the instruments behind me. And so I'm still like, figuring out loads of things. So yeah, my reels, I really find I can sit on it way too long. And I've got to say, put this bloody thing down and get on with work,
Yeah, seriously. So what are you up to? How did you feel about the latest Matrix film? Did it get you nostalgic of that whole time?
Well, I enjoyed bits of it. I went to see it in the IMAX in London.
Oh, wow.
I was left wanting a little bit more that I think films like Dune really covered a lot better.
Oh, Dune was great.
And I think also from Hans Zimmer as well, I'm not often a real big fan of Hans Zimmer either. But I thought on that one, it was amazing. I thought him and his team, they did an amazing job. And I thought the film was amazing. And it really took me into that space. And in the same way that I think Nightmare Alley did. I mean, this is something that you've done for a long time. And that's obviously where I met you, when you were doing The Matrix and you're doing music supervision. And again, I think people would like to know more about music supervision, how they can maybe aim their tracks at music supervisors, of which I'm sure is a nightmare for you guys.
My favorite tip is to find a resource of editors and feed the music to editors, because it's such a kind of an overlooked role. I think you'd really stand to benefit, because no one else is really thinking about this angle. Just because I think those folks are in those little dark rooms in a position of temping sounds and music in at an early stage, and so it's an opportunity to get something going.
What did you think of The Matrix?
I enjoyed it. It was bittersweet because that was such a huge part of my life. It's like 3 years of my life, and thinking back, and I know it was like 20 years ago, but just not to be involved, it was a little bittersweet.
What did you actually think of the music?
I felt like it was a little lacking. I felt like there were several points where it really needed to be just much more robust and kind of match the intention visually. It just didn't get there. From back when we met and you coming on to the project, and it was so awesome to watch you bring your whole repertoire and your vision, and also do that kind of delicate dance with Don Davis, because the ask was sort of complicated in that you needed to sort of bring some ideas and some energy and a different way to look at things to him. And, he's sort of a more conservative guy, right? You brought this whole fusion of styles that incorporates world music instrumentation with sort of techno and trance and industrial in a way, and it is such a fresh fusion of sounds that I think the Wachowskis were just really, kudos to them for even suggesting it, because I think it matched their vision for the film's story and style being referential to so many different things, and it wasn't strictly kind of narrowly one thing. And I think you represented that to them, and they were very, very smart to bring you into the mix.
Jump on. have them. 1 out of 12, please respond.
I mean, I loved it. I think that's possibly one of the highlights of, by the time I'm sort of croaking on my deathbed, there's certain images from that time that will stay with me into the vapor.
And you setting up shop in the Paramore Estate, which was this amazing building over on the east side in Silver Lake area. And you set up your studio in this brilliant venue. So cool.
When I had that meeting with the Wachowskis, they said to me, go and find yourself a studio. I felt like I had to nail my massive boots down to the ground to stop myself from flying. And I told them what desk I had, and I'd like it to have the same desk if possible. And they said, well, there's a castle in Silver Lake. So I went, okay, that's the one. And because I think I was meant to come to your place, wasn't I? You were working in a whole series of studios.
Yeah, down in Venice.
Down in Venice.
Machine Head, yeah.
That was it. And I think I was meant to go there, but there was a calling that said, go there. But it was such an amazing time. And I had Alice in Chains were there at the same time, and I was sort of shunted off into this really lovely boutique-y area as I was just doing final programming. And Alice in Chains kept on coming and stealing my Les Paul because they thought it sounded the best through this particular amplifier. So it was really, and I think Fiona Apple was there as well at the same time.
Yeah, it's. I've noticed it featured in a reality dating show as the venue for the TV show. I've noticed it's continued to be a venue for weddings. It hosted the Ninja Tune party this past Christmas holiday. So a lot of different things happen over there still.
Now with your record label, are you working by yourself, or have you got a team of people?
It's a one-man band. So it's a bit of a hobby still. I've got, ambition for it, but I really just wanted to open up a channel for music, to put out music and to work with friends to put out stuff.
And you're writing now?
I am, yeah. I've using Ableton Live, and I think for me, everybody kind of works differently, but I just needed to figure it out on my own. I've been in lots of sessions as a producer where it's more of an executive producer role, where I'm sort of sitting on the couch the whole time, kind of making notes and suggestions, but I'm not really doing it. And I needed to just take the time to figure out how to really do it. And it's been a great process, a really interesting process.
How do you find it being like when you're the person, you have to bounce the wall off the other you? Like I've got 7 personalities in here that sort of accompany me on a track.
It just makes me happy. It just makes me happy to work on music. And so I've got a ton of just unfinished demo ideas. And I know that I probably need people to bounce ideas off of outside of this room and maybe ask for input, and that would be a healthy process, and that would probably take a lot of these tracks.
What part do you find difficult? Do you find the arranging part difficult once you've got all the ideas? And then you go, okay.
It's the arranging part, sort of fleshing it out, as in sort of a song structure, or if it's not a song structure, kind of something that would make sense to me as a DJ. I'm really enjoying writing by ear, without any real training, playing all kinds of instruments that are part of the program already.
Which program are you using? Are you using like Contacts and things like that?
I'm just using Ableton. They give you a bunch of instruments there. And then I subscribe to a service called Splice, where you can review all kinds of samples. But I've gravitated away from that because there's an artistry to using a sample and sort of reshaping it.
You've got the most amazing library of samples behind you.
Yeah.
I used to have this guy called Tony Thorpe. He was like the big rhythm man in the KLF.
Oh, yeah.
And a massive guy. And he'd come into the studio with about this many records. And I'd put the record deck in front of him, tied up to the DAT machine. And I'd say, Tony, just record the bits that you really like that we can steal. And this was like early drum and bass jungle sort of times. And they spent a few hours just going through all the records, recording all the little bits. Then we'd put them into the sampler. And I think that's a really cool way of doing, especially with your collection. I mean, it's like, Jesus. Yeah. I mean, you've got everything there.
Yeah,
and then if you take it with like granular synthesis, it creates wonderful landscapes.
And that'd be a great way to kind of activate this collection, which is just sort of gathering dust.
Amazing. I mean, yeah. And I think the thing is with samples, unless you make it yourself, you have no emotional attachment to them. Yeah. So if you get a collection of bass drums or weird noises or synthesizers, it means nothing to me. But if I create them myself, it means everything to me. And then my brain will go, click, I know that sound, it's over there, so I'll go and get it and put it in.
Yeah. And learning that has been great for me. Learning what you're just sort of mentioning is the distinction between an emotional attachment to something you've created versus a sample where you're really hemmed in. It's been written before you and you can't change it. And it's just limitation. So I'm enjoying the process and I'm not sure where it'll go, but we'll see.
I think that's the great thing about it is because it's your journey, not anyone else's journey. And it doesn't matter where it goes because it's wherever it ends up is satisfying. It should just be satisfying. Yeah. You're also getting involved in, or you have been for quite a long time with the Masquerade Ball. What is the Masquerade Ball?
Well, sadly, it's done now, but it was a Halloween benefit ball for public radio that became, massive. And we did it at a old hotel here in Los Angeles called the Park Plaza, which is past its prime, is, sufficiently kind of creepy and haunted.
Wow.
And I had actually gone to a lot of underground parties and raves in my early 20s at that venue. So it was meaningful for me to come back to it, bringing this benefit event. Anyway, we don't do it anymore. We did it probably 6 or 7 years consecutively. But when I stepped down from KCRW, a lot of the things that I was working on that were my priorities, fell by the wayside with the new administration.
And if you were to do if there's one place in that sort of area where you're living, you'd love to do a party, or where would you take it?
That's the $1 million question, because I do miss playing live, and obviously the pandemic threw a wrench in a lot of that. But it's sort of a question of where I would want to be, and where I don't want to be is at a nightclub at 2 a.m. in Hollywood. So it's tricky because I'm kind of envisioning a new kind of venue to enjoy dance music and mixed, DJ sets. It'd be a new format.
What do you think about things like VR and Tribe? It's quite interesting because you got the Pioneer 3000 in there and you can go and do all of these things and put on your own shows, and it's like a VR DJ show. I mean, I think it's, we're still at early days with VR. We're building a world in alt space at the moment that I think we're going to do something in. And I mean, I thought I would be addicted to VR, but I feel like I can very much put it down and leave it alone. And I really want to go out and see the sea and go for a walk in the hills or something like that. And
my only concern with that is one of the biggest attractions for that music scene is that it's sounds that you can feel, as opposed to listening to the Beatles on the radio, on the AM radio and screaming your head off as a teenager. The evolution of the experience of live music has come so far to where you're at a warehouse, the lighting system, the sound system, it's just like you're enveloped. And so I think that's always been so exciting. To sort of revert to a virtual world seems a little underwhelming.
Well, it's quite strange because it's quite strange because I was talking to one person in there, and we were in alt space, and I was saying it feels like this is what it must be like to be in a wheelchair. Because you haven't got any you haven't got any legs, you haven't got any arms, you just got hands, and you move around like this sort of thing. It's quite bizarre. I just think for the futures of children around the world when it becomes an everyday aspect. The learning abilities are amazing. There's a thing called First Life by David Attenborough, and it takes you into this world, and it's all underwater, obviously, because it's the first life on Earth, and you're seeing, you know, the first plant that turns into this amoeba thing. And it's just, I was like blown away by it for 10 minutes. And the sound is amazing on this thing, but it's not an alternative to real life, thank God.
Or not yet.
Not yet. But where would you like to have a show?
It would just have to be kind of a rooftop thing in Venice, maybe somewhere down the boardwalk or by the beach. Again, it's something that has to be attractive to me in what I would want to be doing now in my life, which is not at a traditional nightclub. But the advantage that the nightclub has is it has the production. It has all of the lights and the sound is installed already. And so I don't find that at a beach club or a rooftop and so it's sort of a big question. Maybe I think
it's funny. It's funny though, isn't it? Because like when you go back to say your beginnings as well in like '88, and I was going off to these raves on a toxic waste dump in West Ham. With it was, you know, you wouldn't be allowed there now, and there's just a shitty little sound system, and my dog would put all these lights on, and he was pretty much the lighting. But it was so much fun. And what was a shitty little PA system, as your brain and ears got used to it, was just the best thing anyway. So I don't know if we really need amazing production. I just think we need the right vibe of people and collections of people.
I was impressed with a visit recently, well, a few years ago now, actually, to Berlin. And they had a really active outdoor riverside party scene. And it was just more of a social. It would be in the evening. There'd be great, groups of dancing. It was still a club environment, but it was outdoors and by the river. It was just so cool. And it was like, wow, this is more what I'd like to be doing is you're connected with nature a little bit more. You're still enjoying music and connected to music. It can't be like music as the afterthought or the background. It's music first, but it's in alternative settings that are outside of the standard nightclub.
Yeah, well, I'd go along with that. You got to know Michael Lang, didn't you?
I met him a few times, yeah.
He was the guy behind Woodstock, wasn't he? And that sort of coming together of a generation in the time when America was very much at a crossroads culturally. And what was he like, by the way? Because he seemed pretty cool.
He was just somebody that was willing to take chances with ideas and creativity. And, that's sadly, it's sort of a special characteristic these days. And he was just someone that was willing to put creative people together consistently. And so you kind of felt that even, I met him, he was quite a bit older and he still had that vibe. It's not like he had mutated into something or his sort of instinct for that had been tamped down. It was still really apparent.
Because in like our scene, like when Michael Lang died, there were 50,000 people gathered in Manhattan to see his memorial or his burial. I mean, who out of this sort of movement that started in the late 80s, early 90s, would you say had that same sort of power, that influence?
Well, I mean, I'd have to acknowledge Pasquale Rotella from EDC, who, I first met him. He was just passing out flyers outside of raves and warehouses, and he was the visionary behind Insomniac, which is a major concert promoter now, owned by Live Nation, actually. But he's grown up from the grassroots, coming from that kind of a kid passing out flyers to creating the largest dance music festival in the country, which is the Electric Daisy Carnival, EDC, in Vegas every year. The next one is
amazing, huh?
in May. And you think about the scale of that, the production, it's like multiple Coachellas, it's really massive. It's held now on the Las Vegas Motor Speedway, which doesn't sound that inviting, but they dress it up real well. The production is state of the art. I'd have to acknowledge that he is someone who's important to the scene. He's sort of our generation's Michael Lang. But then, I mean, you've got to point to Burning Man. I don't know the founders of Burning Man personally, but that is obviously a point of reference for so many people. That's been huge.
I love Burning Man. The one time I went, I went for the Paul Oakenfold stage. He invited me to go and play there, and I loved it. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, I have to say, 100% of respondents have said that it's been this life-changing kind of thing. I really haven't encountered anyone that's been, regretting that they went.
No. Well, thanks a lot for joining us on Inside the Juno Reactor, and thanks for all your contribution to music over the years and the influence that you've more than likely had on young musicians and audiences and people watching films.
Sure. Well, thank you, Ben. I appreciate you reaching out on this, and I have such fond memories of working with you over the years, and just thanks for staying in touch.
Thank you. Thanks again to Jason for coming along, to Maro at Kenji Productions for producing these shows. If you want to follow the podcast, do hit the subscribe, the like button, or even place a review. This helps our visibility on certain platforms. And hopefully again, visit us inside the Juno Reactor.